There's a secret hidden in the lives of the greatest healers, a pattern so ancient, so universal that once you see it, you can never unsee it. Because the people who heal others are often the ones who are most broken themselves. It's everywhere. The doctor who has battled illness, the therapist who has walked through depression, the teacher who struggled in school, the ones who guide others out of suffering and almost always carry wounds of their own. But why? Is it just coincidence? Or is there a deeper hidden pattern, something ancient, something universal? Carl Jung had a name for it, the wounded healer archetype. A strange paradox buried deep within the human experience. It suggests something radical. That true healing does not come from standing above suffering. It comes from stepping into it, from knowing it intimately, from having walked through it yourself. And this idea, this pattern isn't new. It is woven into our oldest myths, our sacred texts, our histories. The gods who suffer, the wounded warriors, the exiled mystics. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just that healers tend to have suffered. It's that their suffering itself is the source of their power. Because when suffering is met with awareness, when it is fully confronted, fully understood, it transforms. It ceases to be just pain, just loss, just trauma. It becomes something else, something rare, something powerful. But if suffering can be transformed into wisdom, if pain can become power, then what does that mean for you? Because this story, this archetype, this wounded healer, it is not just about myths, it's about you. But to understand this fully, we need to go back to one of the oldest stories of all. The story of a healer who could cure anyone except himself. In the Age of Heroes, there was a centaur unlike any other. His name was Chiron. Unlike his wild, untamed kin, Chiron was wise, noble, learned. He was a master of medicine, a teacher of gods and mortals alike. The greatest heroes of legend, Achilles, Jason, Asclepius, trained under him. Kings sought his counsel. Even the gods respected his wisdom. He was, by all accounts, the perfect healer. But Chiron carried a wound, a deep, incurable wound. One day, through an accident of fate, he was struck by a poisoned arrow. The venom burned through his immortal veins, searing his flesh, twisting his body in unrelenting agony. And yet, he did not die. Immortal as he was, death would not take him, nor would time bring him relief. He was trapped, doomed to endure endless suffering with no hope of escape. A healer who could cure anyone, except himself. Pause for a moment and think about that. The therapist who guides others through their darkness, but cannot seem to escape their own. The mentor who gives the best advice, but never follows it themselves. The doctor who saves lives, but neglects their own health. The mother who nurtures everyone, but never allows herself to rest. The Greeks saw something profound in Chiron's suffering. They saw that wisdom is often born out of pain, that suffering, when met with awareness, becomes its own kind of teacher. And this is why Chiron was more than just a healer. He was a guide, a mentor, a figure who led others toward their own greatness. Because he knew what it meant to hurt. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because despite his pain, Chiron did something extraordinary. He made a choice. He chose to give up his immortality. After years of suffering, he saw a way out. He could take the place of another, Prometheus, the bringer of fire, the one condemned to eternal torment for giving mankind the gift of knowledge. And so, in an act of ultimate sacrifice, Chiron exchanged his own suffering for another's freedom. Now consider what that really means. An immortal being doomed to suffer forever finally finds a way out. But instead of escaping, he chooses suffering over selfishness. Why? Because his suffering had already transformed him into something more, something beyond just a healer, a teacher, a guide, a force greater than himself. And this is what sets the true wounded healer apart. Not the suffering itself, not the wounds, but the transformation. So what does that tell us? It tells us that suffering, real suffering, is not the end of the story, that there is a way to transform it, that our wounds, if we meet them with awareness, can become a gift. And that brings us back to the question we asked at the beginning. If suffering can be turned into wisdom, if pain can be turned into power, then what does that mean for you? Because this pattern is not just found in myths, it is found in real life. And it's found in one of the oldest spiritual traditions in the world. And to see it clearly, we need to step into the world of the shaman. Across the world, in cultures that have never met, that share no language, no written history, one figure appears again and again. A figure who walks between worlds, a healer, yes, but one who does not heal in the way we think of today. This is the shaman, and the way they become a healer is unlike anything we could imagine. The shaman is not chosen, they are taken. It begins with sickness, a wasting away of the body or the mind. They are seized by visions, tormented by dreams, stalked by spirits no one else can see. To their family, to their village, it looks like they are dying. But the elders know better. This is an initiation, a sacred breaking. Because to become a healer, the shaman must first be wounded, and this ordeal is not metaphorical, it is brutal. Among the Yakut people of Siberia, it is said that the spirits of the underworld take the chosen and tear them apart. They rip out their bones, they boil their flesh, they replace their body piece by piece, forging them anew, crystals in their heart, iron in their spine. In the Arctic, the Inuit tell of spirits that devour the shaman-to-be, grinding them to dust before spitting them back out, transformed. And if they survive, if they endure this descent into madness, into death, they return, and they return with a gift, the power to heal. This is the oldest form of the wounded healer archetype. The idea that to heal others, one must first endure suffering oneself. But why? Why does this pattern appear everywhere, from the frozen tundras of Mongolia to the rainforests of the Amazon? Why is it not enough to simply learn the craft of healing? Why must the shaman be broken first? Because healing is not about knowledge, it is about transformation. The shaman does not simply understand suffering, they have lived it, they have faced pain, despair, death itself, and they have returned, changed. This is why they can walk between worlds. This is why they can guide others. They have made the journey first. Does this sound familiar? A descent into the abyss, a confrontation with suffering, a transformation through fire. This is the story of Chiron all over again, but now we see it in its rawest, most primal form. The wounded healer, not as a philosopher or a doctor, but as something ancient. A figure who must be broken to become whole. Carl Jung saw this. He believed that the shaman's journey was not just an ancient ritual, it was a psychological truth. He saw that it mirrored something we all go through, whether we realize it or not. He called it individuation, the deep and difficult task of becoming whole. And it is not just something that happens in distant tribes. It happens today in ways most people never recognize. It happens when someone survives a breakdown and emerges with new insight. It happens when trauma forces someone to reevaluate everything they thought they knew, and they come out the other side with a new perspective. It happens when someone walks into therapy for the first time, terrified and uncertain, and years later they find themselves guiding someone else through the very same darkness they once faced. The path of the shaman is the path of the healer. It is the journey of losing yourself and coming back changed. But this is only the beginning, because while myth and ritual give us an ancient model of the wounded healer, it is Jung who brings this archetype into the modern world. And to understand its true power, we must look at the man himself. In 1913, Carl Jung was on the verge of madness. He had just severed ties with Sigmund Freud, his mentor and closest intellectual ally, And now, alone and adrift, he began to experience strange and terrifying visions. Images of blood filling the streets, of monstrous figures emerging from the unconscious. He feared he was losing his mind. But instead of resisting, he did something extraordinary. He let it happen. He sat with the visions, he spoke with them. He recorded them meticulously, sketched them in great detail, engaged in a direct dialogue with his unconscious mind. And what he discovered would change psychology forever. Jung called this process active imagination, a method of confronting the depths of the psyche rather than avoiding them. And through this descent into his own mind, he not only survived his crisis, he found something profound. He realized that healing does not come from suppressing pain, it comes from meeting it directly. It was this experience, his own descent into the underworld of the mind, that led him to formulate many of his greatest insights. The concept of the shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of ourselves. The collective unconscious, the vast, inherited well of human experience. The archetypes, the deep, universal patterns that shape our thoughts and behaviors. And among these archetypes, the one that perhaps defined him the most, the wounded healer. Jung understood something radical. A healer is not simply someone who has knowledge. A healer is someone who has suffered. And crucially, someone who has transformed their suffering into wisdom. He wrote that the doctor is effective only when he himself is affected. The doctor must heal himself before he can heal others. True healing does not come from detachment, it comes from experience. From having walked through suffering yourself and emerged on the other side with something to offer. This is why so many therapists, counselors, and caregivers have their own histories of pain. It is why the best mentors are those who have once been lost. It is why the most profound healers are often those who have walked through their own darkness. But there is a danger in this too, a danger that Jung saw clearly. Because just as a healer's wounds can be a source of wisdom, they can also become a source of blindness. Not every wounded person becomes a healer. Some become trapped in their wounds. They seek to heal others not out of wisdom, but out of a desperate attempt to fix something in themselves. They project their own unresolved pain onto those they wish to help, and in doing so they risk doing more harm than good. Think of the therapist who becomes overly involved in their clients' lives, not because they truly want to help, but because they have unresolved issues of their own that they are trying to work through. Think of the doctor who throws themselves obsessively into their work, neglecting their own well-being, unable to step back because saving others is the only way they know how to escape their own pain. Think of the leader who starts with noble intentions, but whose unhealed wounds turn them into something else, a figure who manipulates, controls, even harms, all in the name of helping. This is the shadow of the wounded healer. Jung knew that a healer's wounds, if not fully acknowledged, can distort their work. That an unexamined wound can make a person believe that their suffering gives them the right to heal others, even if they have not healed themselves. This is why not all healers are truly healers. Some, without realizing it, are still searching for their own healing in the people they try to help. And this is the hidden danger of the archetype. Because healing is not just about having suffered, it is about what you do with that suffering. About whether you integrate it or whether it consumes you. Jung understood that the wounded healer must walk a fine line, that their gift can just as easily become their curse. That to truly heal others, they must first confront their own darkness. And that brings us to the most difficult question of all. How do you know if you are truly healing, or if you are simply repeating your wounds in the name of helping others? How do you know if your pain has made you wise, or if it has merely made you blind? Because that is the line that separates the healer from the wounded. And the answer is what makes all the difference. There is a hidden danger in the wounded healer archetype, a trap so subtle, so insidious that many who fall into it never realize what has happened. We like to believe that those who heal do so purely out of wisdom and compassion, that the doctor heals because they care, that the therapist listens because they understand, that the mentor guides because they wish to see others succeed. And sometimes this is true, but not always. Because there is a shadow side to healing, a hidden force that twists the very thing that makes the healer powerful. And it is this: not every wounded person heals. Some remain trapped, some never fully face their pain, never integrate it, never transform it. And when they do not, they run the risk of projecting their unresolved wounds onto those they wish to help. Carl Jung saw this. He called it the wounded healer complex. He warned that those who identify too strongly with the role of the healer may not be healing others at all. They may be using others to heal themselves. And this is where things go wrong. Think of the therapist who is drawn to their work, not because they have found peace, but because they are still searching for it. Think of the doctor who throws themselves into medicine, not out of balance, but out of a desperate need to avoid their own pain. Think of the leader who, after enduring their own suffering, begins to see themselves as a savior, believing that only they have the answers, that only they can fix what is broken. This is the danger, that the healer begins to need the wounded, and so they make themselves indispensable. They become the one with the answers, the one with the solutions, the one who is always right. They do not empower, they do not guide, they control. And perhaps worst of all, they do not see it. Jung understood that an unexamined wound can make a person believe that their suffering gives them a right to heal others. But suffering alone does not create wisdom. Experience alone does not create clarity. To be a true healer, one must first have confronted their own darkness, not once, not briefly, but fully. They must have sat with it, examined it, and most importantly, let go of it. Because a healer who cannot let go of their pain will never truly heal. They will simply recreate it in others. This is why some of the greatest dangers in history have come from those who started as healers, as guides, as visionaries. The cult leader who begins with a message of love but slowly bends their followers to their will. The spiritual teacher who preaches enlightenment but secretly seeks validation. The politician who promises to heal the wounds of the people, but in doing so only deepens them. The shadow side of the healer is not just about failing to heal, it is about something far worse. It is about mistaking control for healing. It is about seeing oneself as the only answer. It is about keeping people dependent rather than setting them free. And this is why the wounded healer must be vigilant. This is why the greatest work a healer must do is on themselves. Because the moment healing becomes about the healer's needs, the moment it becomes about validation or control or identity, it ceases to be healing at all. And so the question must be asked, are you healing because you wish to help, or are you healing because it makes you feel whole? Are you guiding others toward their own strength, or are you keeping them in their wounds so that you remain needed? This is the difference. This is the line. And those who do not see it are doomed to cross it. Because true healing, real healing, requires something most are unwilling to give. It requires that the healer step aside, that they remove themselves from the process, that they become not the center of the healing, but simply a guide, a light, a presence that points the way but does not walk it for others. And those who fail to do this, they may continue to believe they are healing, but in truth, they will have become something else entirely. And this brings us to the most difficult question of all. If pain can turn into wisdom, if suffering can transform into power, then how do we ensure that transformation is real? How do we know when a healer is truly healed? Because that is the only thing that separates the healer from the wounded. At some point in life, we all ask the same question. Why did I have to go through this? Why did this happen to me? It is a question that lingers in the minds of anyone who has suffered, and often there is no answer, no reason that feels satisfying. But sometimes, if we look closely enough, we begin to see something else, something unexpected. We begin to see that our pain, if we allow it, can be transformed into something greater. This is the final secret of the wounded healer archetype. The understanding that our deepest wounds are not just burdens, they are gifts. Not in the sense that suffering is something to be sought or that pain is noble, but in the sense that what we learn through suffering can become a source of healing for others. This is what separates the true wounded healer from the false one. The true wounded healer does not cling to their wounds. They do not wear them as a badge of honor. They do not let their suffering define them. Instead, they take what they have learned and they offer it freely. Think of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz and later wrote Man's Search for Meaning, a book that has helped millions of people find purpose in their suffering. Think of Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison, yet emerged with a message of reconciliation instead of hatred. Think of the people in your own life, the ones who have been through hell yet somehow found a way to turn their pain into something meaningful. And it is not just the famous figures, it is the former addict who now helps others out of addiction. The person who has faced grief and now knows how to sit with someone else in their sorrow. The child who grew up in chaos and now builds stability for others. These are the modern wounded healers, the ones who have transformed their wounds into wisdom. But this transformation does not happen automatically. It requires choice, a decision, a moment of realization that we do not have to remain trapped in our suffering, that we can choose to use it, to let it shape us rather than define us. And this is where healing truly begins, not when we try to erase the past, not when we pretend the wounds never happened, but when we look at them and say, I see you, I acknowledge you, and I choose to use you for something greater. This is the path of the true wounded healer. Not to be trapped in suffering, not to seek to save others out of a need for validation, but to take what was once a source of pain and turn it into a source of light. Because the true wounded healer does not heal for their own sake. They do not seek recognition. They do not seek validation. They do not even seek to be a healer. They simply walk their path, knowing that by doing so, they may, along the way, help others find their own. And that is where true healing begins. There is a moment in every great story when the hero, after trials and tribulations, finally understands the purpose of their journey. They look back and realize that the pain, the struggle, the descent into darkness, it all had meaning, not because suffering itself is noble, but because it shaped them into someone capable of more, someone capable of offering something to the world that they never could have before. And this moment, this turning point, is not just found in myths, it is found in life, because whether we see it or not, we all carry wounds. Some are small, the quiet disappointments, the unspoken regrets. Others run deeper, carved into us by loss, failure, betrayal. But the truth is, no one escapes life unscathed, and that means every single one of us has a choice. We can ignore our wounds, we can let them define us, keep us bitter, make us resentful, we can try to bury them so deep that we never have to feel them again. But wounds do not stay buried. They surface in ways we do not expect, shaping our thoughts, our actions, the way we see the world. Unacknowledged, they fester. Unconfronted, they control us. Or we can take another path. The path of the wounded healer, the path of transformation. This path is not easy. It requires honesty, the willingness to look at our own pain without flinching, to see it for what it is. It requires courage to step into the darkness of our own wounds, to feel the full weight of them without being consumed. It requires patience to sit with the discomfort, to listen to what it has to teach us. And yet, if we do this, something remarkable happens. Our suffering, instead of being something that merely happened to us, becomes something we can use. We begin to understand it. And through that understanding, we gain the ability to help others who are going through the same thing, not as saviors, not as martyrs, but as guides, as people who have walked the path, who know the terrain, and who can say with certainty, you are not alone. This is the final truth of the wounded healer. That healing is not about erasing the past. It is about transforming it. It is about taking what was once a source of pain and turning it into a source of light. And this transformation, this alchemy of suffering into wisdom, is not reserved for a chosen few. It is not only for therapists or doctors or spiritual teachers. It is for anyone who chooses to step onto this path. It is for anyone who dares to look at their own wounds and see not just loss, but potential. And so the question remains, what will you do with your wounds? Will you let them define you? Will you let them keep you small, keep you afraid, keep you trapped? Or will you face them, learn from them, grow from them? Because that choice, in the end, is what makes the difference. The wounded healer is not someone who has suffered. That is only the beginning. The wounded healer is someone who has suffered and decided to use it, to transform it, to offer it, not as a burden, but as a gift. And if you are willing to do that, then you will find that your wounds, no matter how deep, do not have to be the thing that holds you back. They can be the very thing that propels you forward. They can be the key to your greatest wisdom, your deepest purpose. They can be what allows you at last to heal not just yourself, but the world around you. The wounded healer is just one piece of something much bigger. Because if this pattern is real, if it truly exists within all of us, then the next question is clear. How do we use it? How do we take our wounds, our deepest struggles, and not just understand them, but transform them into something greater? Because history, mythology, and psychology all point to the same thing. The ones who walk this path do not just heal themselves, they heal the world around them, and that is what we'll explore next. Because the wounded healer is just one piece of a much greater puzzle. And if you want to understand how to truly step into that power, you'll want to be here for what's coming next.